Topic for today is going to be zebrafish as a model for research on infectious diseases. So my entire talk is going to be divided into two parts. First is going to be an overview on what zebrafish is, what are its types, what are its significance as far as research is concerned, and say for example anatomical structures, morphological details, how you breed them, etc. And then the second part of my presentation would exclusively deal with uh, the few papers that we have published using zebrafish as an um, model for infection. So to start with, the zebrafish, which is otherwise scientifically known as Danio radio, is essentially a small and very colorful freshwater fish, which is common to the tropics. And please remember that it is native to South Asia, especially India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, etc. And you can find it in all aquarium shops. Being a very common aquarium fish, it is primarily used as a feed for larger fishes in aquarium. Uh, so what this means is that if you are planning to switch over to zebrafish as an experimental model, most of the aquariums will offer you the fish free or at a cheaper cost. The habitat for zebrafish is that it is found in shallow ponds, canals, in streams, etc. It is also found in slow moving waters, but temperature is very essential. It can survive between 18 and 24 degrees Celsius. Anything hot than this or anything warmer than that, the fish starts to become abnormal. Uh, Being an omnivorous organism, they feed on a range of organisms such as insects, worms, and zooplanktons, as well as various plant matter in the environment. For all the zoologists there, uh, comes under the kingdom Animalia, and most importantly, it is chordate. So this is what makes it very interesting because uh, humans are also chordates. So anything which is a chordate, and if you are going to work on those animals as a research model, it makes a good amount of sense. It belongs to the family of cyprinids, or as is shown here, Cyprinidae. And I should mention here that Cyprinidae comprises one of the largest family of animals in the case of vertebrate kingdom. Uh, Other examples for cyprinids would be your carp, your fishes such as salmon, etc. The genus is Danio. It's a species that I have used in my lab is radio. But please remember there are 27 different types of or different species of Danio which is available. Okay, this slide is interesting because it shows the different types of zebrafish that are available, and you can see that all the fishes are divided into four segments. The top two ones are the Danio species. Okay, these two come under the Danio species. This particular column shows the hybrids, and the rest of them are mutants. So why I'm trying to present this particular slide is that uh, the fish is very versatile, and you get plenty of different types of zebra fish for your research work, but you have to select the ones that are going to be suitable to your work. Most often in aquariums, you end up getting hybrids which are not really good for working on a specific model. So the idea is to select the wild species, which is shown on the top, and then go from there. And you will notice in this particular slide that pigmentation is a very important feature for Danio radio, and it is an important criteria for the easy identification of different zebrafish types. And also remember, there are 27 species of Danio, and you can actually create a diverse array of mutants as is shown in this particular part of the slide with spectacular pigment patterns as is shown here. This is a close-up view of the pigment pattern and the deposition, and the close-up view will show that the pigments are very uniformly distributed. They are not just random distribution for the zebrafish. And the three major pigments that you usually encounter in the zebrafish are going to be melanophores, the iridophores, which produces the iridescence, and the xanthophores. But please remember, it is not necessary that all zebrafish should have all the three pigments. Some of the zebrafish might have only one, some might have two, or some might have all three in them. This is a close-up view of the zebrafish adult morphology. So just like any other fish, which belongs to the carps group, the top one is the male, the bottom one is the female, and you can see the pattern of uh, pigmentation, which actually gives it the name, the zebrafish. Uh, the life cycle of zebrafish is very interesting, primarily because this is one of the reasons why most researchers prefer zebrafish over other animal models. As you can see, the entire organogenesis, I mean, till organogenesis from fertilization, it takes just 16 hours. And from the fertilization stage till an animal is hatched out, it takes around 90 days. So when you look at the pattern of egg development here, the cleavage in this case is discoidal, and it occurs essentially in the blastodisc. This area is called as the blastodisc. The entire area below is filled with yolk, so no cell division will occur in this particular part. It is restricted to this area. So after cleavage, which occurs for anywhere between 0.75 to 2 hours, what you get is a spear of cell, which is essentially the start of the blastulation stage of the embryo. And in the process of cleavage, please remember, after the first cleavage, which ends up producing two blastomeres, you end up at the end of the cleavage where you have totally 64 blastomeres. Okay, and after the first division, when two cells are produced, you have blastomere division, which occurs every 15 minutes. So in a total, 6 cleavage occurs, which takes up 64 blastomeres. Once the blastula is produced, it lasts for around 2 to 5 hours, and this leads to the stage of gastrulation. Gastrulation lasts for around 5 to 10 hours, and this is important because gastrulation is the time when the blastomeres will reach their future organ forming areas, and this is quite common across all animals. Okay, and at the end of the gastrulation, organogenesis starts, which represents the formation of various internal organs for the fish. Hatching itself occurs after this process, and it takes about 48 to 72 hours. So, in a nutshell, from the time of fertilization till the larva hatches out, and it takes around 90 days. And this part is the actual photograph of a fertilized egg. The egg at the stage of the end of the gastrulation and the adult. When you look at the anatomy of the zebrafish, the larva, as you can see here, is completely transparent. Okay, this is not the case with the adult. And I'm just presenting you a cartoon of the adult because the body is not really transparent except for the fin areas. But in this case, when you see, the larva is completely transparent and you can make out all the major internal organs. And this is why zebrafish larvae is extensively used for all kinds of developmental studies. Just like any vertebrate animal, all the major organs are highlighted here. Okay, gills, heart, intestine, etc., etc. So this is just to show you that zebrafish essentially resembles a typical uh, fish, which can be extensively used for research purpose. Coming to use of zebrafish as an ideal model organism, it is important to recognize that what makes a model organism. First and most important criteria is that it should be well studied. Okay, and it should be well studied as a type as well as an example for other species. This is where I mentioned that zebrafish is a chordate. If you study zebrafish, you come out with a finding in zebrafish. To some extent, it is applicable till humans because we also come under chordates. But if you switch over to the invertebrates, it may not be possible to extrapolate the results in an invertebrate model with that of an vertebrate model. So the system should be uh, well studied in such a way that you can replicate this, or anyone who's going to work on the model can replicate your findings. The other major requirements for an ideal model organism is going to be the size. The adult zebrafish, both male and female, grow up to a maximum of 4.5 to 5 centimeters. That is it. Okay. And they have a life expectancy of around 3 years if they don't die. What is more important is their generation time. This generation time is very interesting because zebrafish females, if they are pregnant, they will lay eggs every day as soon as sun rises. Okay, when this is very unique because when compared to all other carp family, zebrafish, wherein most of the fishes will lay their eggs only in the night time, zebrafish will produce egg and release egg in the daytime at the first sunlight. So you will, if you have a large population of females, you can have a tremendous generation time of both eggs and larvae from which you can derive your adult. The other important requirement is manipulation. Those who have worked with cell culture would know that cell culture systems are easy to manipulate. Okay, manipulation in the sense, I'm not talking about the negative sense of manipulation, but positive sense in the manipulation. In the sense, if you want to produce a transgenic animal, this system is very good. As I also showed you on the various types of mutants of zebrafish that have been derived, this particular system can be easily manipulated genetically. The other important criteria is that the animal should have very less junk DNA, because if there are lots and lots of junk DNA, then it is very difficult to process what the information is. This is where your Drosophila is also a very fantastic system because the amount of junk DNA is quite less. Perhaps what I would consider zebrafish to be very important for as a model organism is that it is inexpensive. Okay, those who have worked with, I would say, cell culture as well as rodent model would support that maintaining cells in culture, buying rats and mice, maintaining them, getting approvals is a very expensive thing. But zebrafish, on the other hand, are very inexpensive, and you can easily generate them in the lab. The last point is also important because zebrafish definitely needs regulatory approvals. But please remember, I have put this in quotes because there are not lot of institutes which actually require regulatory approvals for work in zebrafish. Okay, in some category, these regulatory approvals are primarily needed for larger animals such as your rodents. So, what are the benefits of using zebrafish as a model organism? It has a long history. The model organism started somewhere in the 1960s. The complete genome sequence has also been published in the year 2013, and it contains around 26,000 protein coding genes. The fish is small as well as very robust. They are cheaper to maintain than mice, inexpensive. And please note this: they can, I mean, daylight triggers mating in zebrafish, and they lay millions of eggs. So zebrafish produce hundreds of offspring at weekly intervals. So you have plenty of supply for all your experiments. What is more important, please note the developmental time that I showed. They grow at a very fast rate. Okay. For comparison, they develop as much in a day as a human embryo takes 1 month. The major advantage for zebrafish embryo is that they are very transparent. So all kinds of analysis can be done on the internal structures. Zebrafish eggs, as soon as they are fertilized, please remember they develop outside the mother's body. So it is not an internal development. So for developmental biologists, this is a very good system. Zebrafish have, they are genetically similar to humans, and they are approximately 70% uh, similar to the human genome. As a vertebrate, the zebrafish has some same major organs and systems as humans, and thus their muscle, blood, kidney, eyes, and any other physiological structures they share criteria which are quite common to humans. And please note, they can be easily made transgenic, unlike rodents, because rodent taking a mouse, producing a transgenic animal out of that requires, I mean, it's very costly affair. And one of the most important criteria is that there is a comparative, I mean, based on comparative genomic study, zebrafish and human genome, they exhibit a lot of synteny, okay, which suggests that the genes are derived from a common ancestor. So, in a nutshell, when you look at the use of zebrafish embryo, larva, or the adult, these are the various advantages. So, embryo shows rapid development. There is an optical clarity, which is very much needed for microscopical observations. They are genetically malleable, and the entire development is external. When you look at larva, same way it is optically clear. Genetically, you can manipulate it, and you can, since they are produced in large numbers, they're very good for high throughput screening. When you compare these embryo and larvae to that of the adult is primarily used for understanding vertebrate neural structure. If you take any developmental biology journals, you'll find that most of the neural developmental studies have been done using zebrafish as a model. Adult, it is very low. I mean, it's inexpensive to maintain, and they are, as I said, there are a lot of orthologs of human genes which is shared with the zebrafish. But please remember, when you take into consideration all the other available in vitro models, such as the cell culture system, the fruit fly, Drosophila, zebrafish, or mouse, zebrafish also shows limitations as far as their use is concerned for experimental purpose. Though I said they are malleable. All, I mean, the egg or the embryo or the larvae or the adult, they are malleable. They do exhibit moderate flexibility. Okay, very extensive manipulations actually leads to large-scale mortality that we have also seen in our lab. The predictivity of the result is quite moderate, as unlike your uh, modern models. And more importantly, the translation value of the findings is very moderate. Okay, because as I said, even though this comes and comes under chordate, it is still distant to us. So translation value is a huge problem here. This slide essentially shows the different aspects of research wherein zebrafish is extensively used, and I have just put in pictures of some of those areas. You can find these on Google Images. But what is more important is the numbers which I have presented, which represents the total number of papers that have been published in these areas using zebrafish as a model. Zebrafish in developmental biology, 7,000 papers. Zebrafish for regeneration as well as neurodevelopmental studies, 2,000. And development and behavioral studies, 11,000. Disease model, I'll also show a separate slide for zebrafish and infection. Here it's around 9,000 studies have been published, and in toxicology, around 1,500. Which suggests that zebrafish is gaining prominence. And from 1948 onwards, I mean, almost zero, when you look at the current timeline, you'll find that there is an enormous increase in the number of papers that have been published with zebrafish as an experimental model. Having seen what zebrafish is, I'll try to explain the rudiments of immunity. This is important because the entire topic is on infection biology. So we should know what immunity is. Immunity is nothing but the defense mechanism which can be established as a state of immunity or protection against an infectious agent. Okay, so if your immune system is going to produce a reaction, then that process is called as immunity. The moment your immune system is going to fail, the infectious agent colonizes your system and it results in disease. So please remember, immunity is concerned with resistance to infection, and this essentially is carried out by the process of recognition and disposal of non-self by a variety of humoral and cellular molecules in the body. The entire immunity can be divided into two major types: innate, which is otherwise characterized by non-specific or natural immunity, and acquired, which is characterized by specific or adaptive immune responses. This is where invertebrate immune system and the vertebrate immune system differs. Okay, in the case of invertebrate immune system, all immune responses are categorized as innate responses, whereas in the case of vertebrates, you have an innate component, you also have an acquired component. And just to give you an idea about the importance of acquired immune response, the entire vaccination strategy works on acquired immune response. The acquired can be classified as active or passive. Active or passive can again be divided into natural, artificial, or natural artificial for both active and passive. So active, when I say active acquired immunity, it means that an individual gets infected with a pathogen, suffers a disease, and then his immune system learns about the disease, which means that his body has adapted to the presence of an antigen. Passive is nothing, is passive represents the type of acquired immune response, wherein the person is not exposed to the antigen directly, but rather he is exposed to the antibody or preformed antibody. So when I give you examples for each of these, you will be able to appreciate it. So when you look at active, acquired, natural, it refers to the natural course of infection. Say, for example, you suffer from cold. It means that your body has been exposed to antigens of cold pathogens, and your body is producing an immune response. Okay, active, artificial, acquired essentially represents vaccination, and only those vaccines which use antigens in their in vaccination. So this is going to be live infection. This could be either a live vaccine or an attenuated vaccine. Passive natural or passive acquired natural represents, the one good example for this would be the mother's milk. Okay, mother's milk contains lot of antibodies. So when the child takes the milk, his body receives preformed or passive antibodies from the mother, which protects the infant from infection. When you look at artificial, it is again a type of vaccination wherein preformed antibodies are used. The two important arms of the immune system is going to be the humoral and the cellular uh, components. So both these are known to interact, which essentially produces a very robust immune response in animals. Uh, in this case, this entire scheme would suffice for most of the vertebrate immune system. So here you have the extracellular antigens, which are detected by a type of cell called as the B cell, whose main function is to produce and release antibody in your blood. Okay, so these B cell are in turn helped by certain types of cell, which are called as the T cell. So when you look at the cellular arm of the immune response, the antigens are captured by, or intracellular antigens are captured by cells which are called as the antigen presenting cell. One very good example in this case is going to be the macrophage, which is going to chew these structures up, present a tiny fragment of it on structures called as MHC, and which is then read by T cell. The T cells will get activated, produce different kinds of T cell, and some of these T cell will end up producing signaling molecules, or say something like give a signal out to the B cell, which will cause the B cell to develop into the plasma cell, which produces antibody, and memory cell, which will retain the memory of the antigen to which it is exposed. Which means when, for the first time when you fall sick, but after 5 or 6 years, when you are again infected by the same antigen, you will never fall sick, because you have a memory component in your body which remembers the antigen to which you were actually exposed. And in this case, if the T cell is activated, then the T cell will go on to kill the target cell, and thus all your antigens are also killed in the process. When you say infection and what is disease, please remember infection and disease are completely different. Okay, so infection, as per this particular paper, is the event that occurs when a host acquires a microbe or the microbe infects the host. Please remember, the microbe has infected the host, but it has not colonized the host. Okay, there's a big difference between infecting the host and colonizing the host. On the other hand, infection is different from the term disease when a weakening of the immune system post-infection and response of the body in terms of symptoms such as pain, fever, aches, tissue and organ inflammation or damage is called as the disease. Okay, one best example to understand the difference between infection is a person who's infected with HIV, but he may not suffer from the AIDS, which is going to be the disease component. Okay, so infection need not go on to produce a disease unless and until the immune system is strong enough. If the immune system breaks down, then infection becomes a disease where the microbe has succeeded in colonizing the host. I just taken this particular figure from the Roy Essential Immunology. In all Roy textbooks, in the first chapter, will show this just to highlight the different types of infectious agent. And on this side, it represents the size of these infectious agent in millimeter. Just some of the major examples are shown here. These are parasite groups, protozoans, fungi, bacteria, viruses. You can fill this or populate this particular table with all agents that can produce an infection. And one of the recent one, your COVID-19 is also a type of infectious agent. Coming to the characteristics of the zebrafish immune system. So please note, since it is an vertebrate, it comprises both innate and adaptive immune system, which is similar to mammals and all other jawed vertebrates. Okay, the development of immune cells occurs during embryogenesis. Okay, even for humans, the development of immune cells occurs during embryogenesis, and only activation of the immune cells or selection of the immune cells occurs post. Post delivery of the child. So in the case of the zebrafish, immune cell development embryogenesis occurs as a wave of primitive and definitive hematopoiesis. And in the case of humans, the hematopoietic organ is going to be your bone marrow. Hematopoiesis, in the case of zebrafish, it shifts from several locations. Initially, it starts from the yolk, which is supplied by the female zebrafish, and then it switches over. Though the site of hematopoiesis is different between zebrafish and mammals, please note the cellular and regulatory process of hematopoiesis are highly conserved. Okay, so this is where it is important, because whatever we understand using zebrafish as a model, it is very applicable to most of the mammalian system. So this particular diagram shows that the different types of cells that are generated post-fertilization. So 1 day post-fertilization, a type of cell which is called as the primitive macrophages are produced. Then comes the neutrophils, which we also have. Then we have 5 days post-fertilization immature lymphoblasts, that is T cell, which we also have, and 2 or 4 weeks post-fertilization, the entire adaptive immune system undergoes maturation. This particular figure is just a representative. Don't worry about the details. To show that what are the different types of proteins which get activated during the process during the process of an immune challenge by an antigen in the case of a zebrafish embryo. And please note, both pro-inflammatory as well as anti-inflammatory cytokine genes are highly activated once it is challenged. And what is important is the cellular recognition mechanism for an antigen is the same as that of most other vertebrates. The downstream signaling component, which is established here, you'll find it even in the case of humans. The end response, which is produced by these immune cells, these are also highly conserved in the case of vertebrate system, including humans. So it makes a lot of sense when you use zebrafish as a model for infection. Uh, as I had mentioned earlier, when when you use the keywords zebrafish and infection on PubMed, you will get these many number of papers which have used zebrafish as a model for infection studies. Okay, uh, there are different types of methods of using zebrafish as a model. As far as the eggs and embryos are concerned, you can use a micro injection, or in most of the toxicological studies, for example, they do what is known as a bath exposure. Larva can also be used for bath exposure, which means that the material, whatever is supplied in the water, it gets into the animal through the skin. But as far as infection studies with zebrafish is concerned, you cannot produce a successful infection with bath exposure. So most of the infection studies using zebrafish larvae or adult, for example, or what we also follow in our lab is using your syringes, which are used for injecting. So there are different ways of producing, infection. This particular image shows, intraperitoneal injection. You can also do injections via different route. This is injecting in the hindbrain ventricle region. This is in the aortic vesicle. Okay, this particular area is concerned with the duct of Cuvier, which is one of the most common ways of infecting larval zebrafish. This is yolk sac infection. Okay, this particular infection site is caudal vein. This is notochord. This particular infection site is the subcutaneous or intramuscular. For the studies that we have used, it is intramuscular. You can also produce infection in the tail fin, but tail fin is highly regenerative. Okay, so it essentially is used for studying mechanism of regeneration rather than infection. Uh, so once you have infected or whatever chemical treatments you have done, please remember, because of the transparent nature of the larvae as well as the embryos, you can actually visualize or do live cell imaging of the host pathogen interaction. This particular slide is to show how actual infection can be visualized in a zebrafish. So this particular fish is a healthy one, and you can see the abdominal region of the zebrafish here. Everything is red in color, okay, which shows the classical inflammation upon in injecting with a pathogen. The same kind of redness is also seen in the case of humans when, say, for example, you undergo inflammatory changes. Though labs which are not having enough funds, usually, as I also did, we relied on Hamilton syringes or small insulin syringes for injecting. The ideal system would be this particular setup of micro injector system, which can be used for all stages of zebrafish. Okay, so you have the stereo microscope along with the camera, so that students can also view, and these are the two controllers or manipulators with which you can hold the pipette in which you have taken your reagent or anything that you want to inject, and you can uh, I mean use controllers to handle the micro injector such that you make very precise injections. This is a close-up view of a micro injector. You can see the holder with the micro pipette, which is this is the sharp needle, and you can see that this area is the region where the embryo is lying. Okay, blown up of that is this particular structure. You can see the tip of the needle, which has penetrated the outer layer of the embryo, and you are going to inject it into the yolk. And recollect from the life cycle stages, this is the blastomere, or this is the discoblast region of the embryo, which has undergone cleavage. So whatever material you inject into the egg here, this will be taken up by blastomeres for developmental studies. In our lab, breeding of zebrafish is also relatively easy. Um, in our lab, we follow different techniques, but the most easier one is going to be this. That is, you have a box which is provided with holes at the bottom, and which can be inserted onto a bigger box, essentially a fish tank. So we've used this. We also used this particular setup in our lab, wherein you have pebbles or marbles at the base of the fish tank. So, as I mentioned earlier, the female zebrafish, if it is pregnant, it will lay eggs every day at daylight. So, in this case, since there are holes in the bottom of this particular tank, you will leave the female and the male fishes here, and at daylight, if the female spawns, the eggs will fall below. Now, the reason why the female and the eggs have to be separated is because spawning is a very energetic process for these animals. So, as soon as the female is spawned, ends spawning, it might feed up on its own egg. Okay, most of the eggs will be taken up by the female herself. So, to prevent that or to maximize your chances of collecting more number of eggs, this particular setup is used. The same logic is also applied here. When the female spawns, the eggs will fall and enter the gaps between these pebbles and marbles. So subsequently, you have to remove the adult and drain the water and collect the eggs separately. Okay, so this is the small. This is for small scale breeding, but you can go online and check that the labs wherein they use lots of zebrafish, they have a large scale breeding where you'll have entire rows and rows of fish cages for breeding of zebrafish. So having finished a brief overview of the zebrafish, let's move over to what we have been doing on zebrafish infection. So the general idea that is shown here is that we'll take the zebrafish, infect them with pathogen, and then go on to check whether the fish dies or the fish survives, depending on what we are using as a antibacterial agent here. And we will try to show different kinds of experimental evidence to prove that the system actually works. In one of the first studies with infection that we started was with the use of zebrafish as a model for controlling infection of using platinum nanoparticles. So platinum nanoparticles were actually found to be very bacteriostatic, as can be seen by these petri dishes by growth inhibition analysis. Initially the tested organisms, they showed good amount retarded growth. Okay, and this, when we assessed using the growth inhibition curve, the absorbance was low initially, but subsequently it peaked and reached a plateau. Okay, so till 60 minutes there was a continuous decrease in the absorbance, but after 600 minutes there was a plateau, and which suggests that platinum nanoparticles are very good for controlling bacterial growth. In this particular image, we took the platinum nanoparticle because platinum nanoparticles are not biomolecules. We tested them for toxicity assays using zebrafish, and the two major markers for toxicity that we studied was naphthol esterases from the liver, alpha and beta naphthol, and acetylcholinesterase from the brain. And as can be seen from these figures, there is no significant difference between the test and the control for alpha naphthol, beta naphthol, as well as for the acetylcholinesterase, which suggests that platinum nanoparticles are not that toxic to the zebrafish. Platinum nanoparticles, after we produced infection in zebrafish, please concentrate on this particular table. We divided the zebrafish into 5 groups: the control or uninfected fish, in fish infected with E. coli, fish or infected fish that were treated with a single dose of platinum nanoparticle, double dose or triple dose of nanoparticle. We took 10 fishes in each group. What is important is that the fish did not survive even with double dose of platinum nanoparticle, but all the fish survived when they were given triple dose of platinum nanoparticles after 24 hours. Okay, to substantiate this, we did histopathology of the liver as well as the muscle tissue of the zebrafish. Please note the infection was done intramuscularly, but subsequently the infection spreads to the most of the body. So we took liver and the muscle tissue of zebrafish for our histological analysis. So as you can see in the liver as well as the muscle of the zebrafish, this is the infected group. You can see lot of necrotic changes, which suggests the establishment of colonization as well as infection in the zebrafish. This is the single dose treatment. This is the triple dose treatment. When you compare these two, the number of necrotic cells is much reduced in this case as compared to this, which suggests that platinum nanoparticles are very effective in controlling E. coli infection. At the same time, when you look at, after infection, once the fish is euthanized and we take out the muscle tissue, we homogenize it, make a plate out of it. You can see that the double dose and triple dose, they show lesser and less number of colonies as the time proceeds, which suggests that single dose of platinum nanoparticle was not probably enough to kill all the bacteria, but double dose and triple dose were quite successful in eradicating infection from zebrafish. This slide shows the survivability of the zebrafish, okay, for all the 3 doses. E. coli infected but not treated, the rest are treated with platinum nanoparticle. Okay, so fish alive, please note this particular these numbers. All the fishes were alive after 24 hours. And as you can see, the number of bacteria that were colonizing the zebrafish is also significantly different between the untreated, which of course didn't survive, but after 24 hours of triple dose treatment, the number of CFU has fallen down significantly. The same is same observation was made with Aeromonas hydrophila. Why we use two different is that Aeromonas hydrophila is a natural pathogen for zebrafish, whereas E. coli is not. So to substantiate that, the system works for both a natural pathogen as well as an introduced pathogen. We used Aeromonas hydrophila here, which also shows that at the end of 24 hours, the number of CFU has drastically decreased, increasing the survivability of the zebrafish post 24 hours. This was another study that we performed with Dr. Sai Subramaniam in his lab, which looked at the ability of dithiazole-thione derivatives, whereas efflux pump inhibitors, and their ability to potentiate antibiotic effects and decrease the growth of MRSA. So this particular slide shows the real-time efflux studies with using wild-type SREs for all the dithiazole-thione derivatives as is shown here. Okay, this is the positive control. 7 out of the 10 evaluated compounds displayed here, it enhanced efflux inhibition related to the positive control. Subsequently, MIC of the ciprofloxacin was evaluated with the dithiazole-thione derivative using 5 drugs. Okay, and the results show that most of them produce significant changes. But what is important is that out of all these, only one was significant in producing 256-fold reduction in the MIC. Okay, time kill studies also showed the potency of DTT10 in inhibiting bacterial growth. So we used the same compound for injecting, for treating infected zebrafish with MRSA. So when we examined DTT10 in zebrafish infection model, SREs was injected into these animals at concentration of 1.5 into 10 to the power of 5 CFU, and ciprofloxacin alone or in combination was used for treating. This was used as a triple dose. Ciprofloxacin again was used as a triple dose over a period of 2, 4, and 6 hours post-infection. So as is very clear, when compared to both the placebo as well as ciprofloxacin triple dose, the dithiazole compound 10 was able to produce significant reduction in the MRSA bioburden in zebrafish tissue. Um, this particular study was done with my collaborator Dr. Jayaprada, in which we slightly modified our compound toxicity analysis using ex vivo liver toxicity assay. The idea here was to isolate a metabolite from Streptomyces, which was named as ASK2, and subsequently this compound was tested for toxicity. And cell viability was tested by MTT. So, in a nutshell, the zebrafish were either treated with PBS or they were treated with the compound, which is ASK2 shown here, and then liver cells. I mean, liver was isolated; they were homogenized. Individual cells were isolated, and they were cultured, and MTT assay was performed. And as can be seen here, when ASK2 concentration was increased, there was a corresponding decrease in cell viability of liver cell that had been isolated from the zebrafish, suggesting that ASK2 could be potentially valuable antibacterial agent. Based on toxicity result, uh, we didn't take up 128 microgram per ml because this could actually kill the zebrafish under study. So we selected 48 microgram for all further analysis. In this case, the adult zebrafish were injected with either planktonic K. pneumoniae, or they were injected with the biofilm cells of K. pneumoniae. Upon infection with 10 power 14 and 10 power 12 CFU per ml of a planktonic K. pneumoniae, zebrafish displayed around 100% mortality within 24 hours. And if 10 power 12 CFU cells were injected, they showed around uh, 100% mortality at 120 hours. So when you compare this with the biofilm cells of K. pneumoniae, at 10 power 12 cells, it produced around 100% mortality within 120 hours post infection. In both the cases, lower doses, it actually led to subclinical infection. So those doses were not used when we tested for zebrafish survival. So we used three different groups: control, infected with MDR K. pneumoniae, and treated, which is nothing but the ASK2 compound shown here. So as can be seen, when ASK2 compound from Streptomyces was used, there was around 90% survival rate for the infected zebrafish and a corresponding reduction in the tissue burden of Klebsiella post 24 hours of infection, which indicates that the ASK2 compound is very good in producing control of infection by MDR uh, Klebsiella. This is another study again with Dr. Sai Subramanian, wherein we checked for the antibacterial potential of norfloxacin salts in zebrafish. The time kill studies uh, clearly show that in the first case, the compound is SRI-N3 was very effective against S. aureus and P. aeruginosa, and the results here also clearly show that SRI-N2, which is norfloxacin tartrate, is it performs better with MRSA, whereas SRI-N3, which is norfloxacin benzoate, is very effective against P. aeruginosa. The same result, the study was extrapolated with zebrafish infection model, wherein SRI-N2 was good with MRSA, whereas SRI-N3 was potent against the P. aeruginosa strain. One of the last studies that we did with zebrafish as infection model was the use of jacqueline capped platinum nanoparticles to inhibit bacteria. Okay, in this case, the platinum nanoparticles were complexed with jacqueline and were tested against A. hydrophila, which is a natural pathogen in zebrafish, and preliminary results with not only uh, uh, hydrophila but all other types of bacteria, gram positive and negative bacteria, as is shown here, also suggest that jacqueline platinum nanoparticles are very important antibacterial agents. Uh, this particular slide, experiment was performed for different time at which Jacqueline platinum nanoparticles were injected into the zebrafish, and the results show that till 12 hours, and in the case of untreated, none of the fishes survived, but in the case of treated, the fishes survived beyond 12 hours, and you can see that the number of bacterial colonies is drastically reduced here. Okay, so which means that infected fishes which were left untreated were succumbed to infection within 8 hours, but treated fish were absolutely normal. Tissue colony count actually proves this. For apart from this, we also looked at the role of Jacqueline platinum nanoparticle in modulating the immune response against infection in zebrafish. And for cytokines, the infected zebrafish showed significant increase in TLR4, which is this. Uh, yes, yeah, TLR4, 3 hours post infection, but post 3 hours, TLR4 expression was found to decrease drastically. Okay, so the black bar is for 3 hours, this is for 6 hours, this is 12 hours. So we did not find post infection the ability of TLR4 to keep up. But when you use Jacqueline platinum nanoparticle in all the cytokines that we tested, in this, please concentrate on this group alone, you can see that there is persistent expression of some of these cytokines. Next, we performed a resensitization experiment to understand whether, whether a fish which has been rescued with Jacqueline platinum nanoparticles can survive multiple infections with zebrafish. So for this, what we did was we used we infected zebrafish, treated them with Jacqueline platinum nanoparticle, and once the fishes were rescued of the infection, we used the same fish to reinfect them with the pathogen, but we did not use Jacqueline platinum nanoparticles for treatment here. Okay, so as can be shown here, the fish, all the pro-inflammatory cytokines, when compared to the respective controls, were still elevated. Okay, this suggests that they produce persistent immunity against multiple infections of the pathogen. So this is very interesting, which suggests that Jacqueline platinum nanoparticles can produce persistent immunomodulation. But please remember, in vivo, cytokine expression alone may not be sufficient, and thus we also looked at antibody production and performed a series of radial immune assay, as is shown in the bottom of the slide. The results show that in the case of the control, okay, control and Jacqueline alone, there was in this case, control and Jacqueline alone, there was no precipitation, suggesting no formation of antibody. But in the infected ones as well as the treated ones, there was good amount of antibody production, as is shown with the precipitation formation. Okay, uh, to analyze the formation of hydrophila specific antibody, we set up a series of experiments with resensitized fish. Again, in this case, please remember, the fishes were not treated with Jacqueline platinum nanoparticle. In this case also, we produce the results show that there was a strong formation of precipitin reaction, and this suggests that Jacqueline platinum nanoparticle might actually produce persistent immunity against multiple infections of hydrophila, Aeromonas hydrophila, through the formation of sufficient amount of antibody. Okay, so these were some of the studies that we did with zebrafish and infecting them with different types of antimicrobial agents and trying to understand what is the mechanism for infection as well as for the antimicrobial action. I would now like to draw your attention to two interesting reviews which were published recently on the future perspectives of zebrafish infection studies. So please note that the image looks very, very colorful. These are from the zebrafish larvae. So you can see that different kinds of dyes and trackers have been extensively used in zebrafish larvae to understand the hallmarks of different types of bacterial infection. Okay, so the main thing is that these studies have shown individual labeling of cell is very possible in the case of zebrafish. Cells such as macrophages, as is shown here, and neutrophils, as is shown here. The green thing is neutrophil, and what is present inside the cell is the phagocytosis aeruginosa, which can actually be visualized in real time to understand how infection proceeds in the zebrafish. This is another review which was published this year. So studies using dyes and trackers have led to a better understanding of zebrafish cellular responses to bacterial infection, as these cartoons show. In this case, Mycobacterium marinum. Once upon infection, the macrophages, as is shown here, is recruited by the epithelial cells uh, based on the antigens of the Mycobacterium ESAT, and the epithelial cells produce MMB9 or matrix metalloproteinase, which attracts a lot of other macrophages to the vicinity of infection, which leads to the formation of the primary granuloma. Uh, why I'm emphasizing on this particular aspect is that the same reaction is also seen in the case of humans. Okay, after the preliminary infection, more and more number of macrophages are recruited, and you do produce. I mean, our system also produce granuloma during such infection. So later on, depending upon the nature of the pathogen, either the macrophage can lose control of the infection, or it can mature to secondary granuloma where it can clear off the infection. Mycobacterium leprae, it has also been studied using zebrafish larvae, and in this instant, they have identified that the pathogen infects the macrophage in the nervous system and subsequently migrates along the axon, destroying mitochondria by production of nitric oxide. Okay, which causes the adverse changes associated with this particular infection. In the case of Staph aureus, you can see that they have identified that macrophages initially take up the pathogens and get matured into an LC3 plus phagosome. LC3 plus is interesting because this is one of the components which is very important for autophagy responses in the case of uh, higher animals. Such response has also been found in the case of zebrafish. Okay, and subsequently, again, as I mentioned, for Mycobacterium marinum, it can either produce killing of the pathogen or the pathogen might survive. In this particular case, the pathogen is taken up by the macrophage, macrophage in this case here, and it again attracts a lot of other macrophages, which goes on to establish secondary immune response. Or they have also identified neutrophils, which can take up these these pathogens from subcutaneous injection. Here it is intravenous. They can take up the pathogen, but here they have identified that neutrophils are not capable of controlling the infection. The pathogen actually survives the neutrophil attack and escapes. So these are some of the ideas that have been generated using zebrafish as an experimental model. So this particular resource, online resource, is going to be very useful for students and researchers who might be interested in using zebrafish. It's called ZFIN. Okay, zebrafish information network. You get all kinds of information here. All the any paper, any article, any review, any book which on zebrafish which gets published, it is tagged here. Okay, and the resources are very useful because there are people who work on zebrafish and they use a lot of zebrafish antibodies. Why I'm mentioning antibodies is because it is very difficult to get zebrafish specific antibodies from most of these antibody companies or biotech companies. So you can actually send your requests through ZFIN, and if someone is generous enough, you can actually end up receiving good amount of antibody for your zebrafish resource for research. So I would suggest and strongly encourage students to go through this particular site. You can actually become a member for this and also subscribe to their so finally, to conclude, please note, zebrafish, based on our studies, is an excellent model for understanding the mechanism of infection, immune response or evasion by the pathogen, as well as screening and development of drugs against all kinds of infectious agent. So please note, we have done infection. I mean, we have successfully established infection in zebrafish, and we have also been successful in using zebrafish for screening and development of uh, both biomolecules as well as nanoparticles as anti-infectious agents. I would like to thank Shastra deemed to be university where it all began. Since after I joined there, uh, I would like to thank my collaborators with whom I had published these papers on zebrafish infection studies. Dr. Jayaprada from School of Chemical and Biotechnology, Dr. Sai Subramaniam from School of Chemical and Biotechnology, and Dr. V. Anbalagan, with whom I have done a lot of toxicology studies using zebrafish as a model. I would also like to thank all my past and present students who have contributed immensely to these projects, without whose work and enthusiasm, I don't think any of these would have been possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tyagarajan, for a very, very inspiring and wonderful presentation. I am sure, like a lot of researchers working in the area of biology, will be inspired to take up zebrafish as an infection model, especially after seeing your slides and the way to inject, and also the resources and networks that is available. It's a very, very clear, wonderful, and very systematic presentation, as evidenced by a lot of comments that were appreciating the presentation. Uh,
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
there are a couple of questions which has been posted. I'll read them out. Kindly answer them. So the first one is by Srinikesan. Why do the efficiency of immune system drop down as we grow older?
Okay. The one, I mean, there are two aspects to this. Why our immune responses go down as you, as you age. One is that general aging process, which decreases the robustness of an immune cell, just like all other cells in the body. So the ability of the body to repair itself or fight pathogens decreases. The second important thing is that living in a very clean environment, to say that you are actually living in a sterile environment is very dangerous for your immune system. Your immune system needs a lot of challenges from antigens. I'm not saying that you should go and infect yourself with antigens, different pathogens, and activate your immune system. But what is important is that your immune system should also be challenged every day, because we have what is known as an acquired or adaptive immune system, which needs new information, new antigens to learn. So studies have also shown that if during your younger years, if you are say for example exposed to lot of antigens in the environment, when you once you age, your immune system will will not be 100% robust, but at least 60 to 70% robust, and help you to survive infections when you are old.
Thank you, sir. So the next question by the same person is why the immune system reacts slowly than other organisms.
I didn't get your question. Can you repeat it, sir?
So the question is why the immune system reacts slowly when compared to the infectious agents.
Okay, the why the immune system reacts slowly when compared to the infectious agent is because the immune system should first recognize the antigen. When you take, say, for example, the average adult human being who is, say, 5.8 feet tall, weighs around 85 kilos, uh, there is a lot of tissue, there are a lot of cells to cover. And the body does produce signals for the immune system to know that, to inform the immune system that there is an infection nearby. So the cells have, nearby cells, or if the cells are distant, they have to recognize the antigen, take up the antigen. There is a separate process for preparing the antigen to be presented to the acquired immune system. This takes time. And once the acquired immune system gets activated and, say, for example, starts producing responses in terms of antibody, uh, uh, definitely, please remember there is going to be a new protein synthesis. New protein synthesis takes time. So, taking all this together, it definitely will take anywhere between 7 to 14 days for an effective immune response to generate.
Thanks again. So the other question is by Shankaran, who has asked, what is the difference between zebrafish model and mammalian model of infectious diseases, especially with regards to the immune system?
Okay, there are not too many differences, but to some extent, the regulatory networks are the same. What is there in the zebrafish is also found in the case of vertebrate system, but on the response kinetics, say for example, on the response levels of cytokines, both pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines, there are good amount of differences between, say, a human immune response and a zebrafish immune response. These are some of the aspects wherein, as I mentioned earlier, zebrafish, the responses cannot be easily translatable to a human response. But there are similarities. So I would suggest that use these similarities and try to take your work to a rodent model, which will, which is more similar or which is more nearer to a human physiologically as compared to a zebrafish.
Thank you, sir. So
Yes.
the next question is basically someone has asked, what is a Jacqueline cap nanoparticle? What exactly
Okay.
is Jacqueline
Yeah.
cap nanoparticle?
Okay. Jacqueline is nothing but Jagbin lectin. So the lectin is used as a because platinum nanoparticle as such might have toxicity when you are going to inject it or introduce it into a biological system. And Jacqueline is a lectin which has a lot of immunological value. To use Jacqueline as a capping agent for preventing nanoparticle toxicity as well as to increase the therapeutic efficacy of the platinum nanoparticle. So that is why we used Jack bean lectin.
Okay. So the next question is by Bharati Kannan. Is zebrafish in can zebrafish be used in clinical trials for vaccine development, for example, viruses, especially
Uh,
COVID-19?
no, I don't think so. Zebrafish cannot be used for uh, probably for to satisfy one's curiosity. You can use zebrafish for vaccine studies. You can just understand uh, mechanism of infection or immune evasion by pathogens using zebrafish, but vaccine testing or screening of vaccine candidates may not be possible using zebrafish. Even for subclinical or phase 1 clinical trials, it is necessary to use rodent model rather than zebrafish.
So the next question by Malarvini Ashokan is, what will be the limitations faced in molecular assays using zebrafish as an animal model?
The most important I mean restriction is injecting the embryos. What I didn't mention is that you should have good a good dissection skills when you are going to work with zebrafish model. So the first criteria is that you should have a very good micro injector system, and second thing is the appropriate reagents such as antibody for zebra specific for zebrafish, which are not readily available in the market. If these two are there, then you can do anything with zebrafish.
So there is another question from Sujata, who has
Yes.
asked that is there any research work on zebrafish for COVID-19? And she also has one more question: is there a limit to the use of how many fishes to use per experiment? Similar to mice experiment, is there a number of zebrafish limitation that we have to use for a particular experiment?
Okay, for answering your first part, I don't really do not know whether zebrafish has been used for studying, say, COVID. Uh, as far as your second question is concerned, your mouse or rat models, there has to be a particular number of zebrafish that you have to use for your experiments. Say, for example, when you're looking at initial screening, you need large number of zebrafishes in a particular group. But once you are sure of your molecule, then you can actually reduce it. Okay, so on an average, when we also were running our experiments, per group we restricted it to 15 zebrafish.
So the other question by Sridhar is that can hormonal studies be performed using zebrafish?
Yes, there are studies which have used. I mean, they have looked at hormones and hormone-induced changes in zebrafish. Those essentially come under developmental biology. There are a lot of physiological studies also using uh, zebrafish for hormonal effects.
Okay, so for want of time, I'll just restrict to a couple of more questions. One is
Yes.
from Yasmin. So she has asked, like, why are less regulatory approvals required for zebrafish than other animal models?
Okay, I'm not saying that less regulatory approvals are needed, because if I say that, then I might get into trouble. Regulatory approvals indeed are needed for zebrafish also. As you know, in Shastra, we did get regulatory approvals for zebrafish experiment. But as compared to your rodents, the regulatory approvals are not so strict. Okay. Say, for example, when you request for, say, 6 mice per group, the person who's going to be approving your animal work is definitely going to question it. Why you need 6? Why can't you restrict it to 4 or 5 or something like that? Such restrictions may not be applied to zebrafish because they are small, they are inexpensive. You can generate them in very large numbers. Usually, maintaining large number or using large number of fishes for your experiments is quite possible. So on that level, I said that the regulatory approvals for usage of zebrafish is not as strict as that of rodent models. But in a lot of uh, Western countries, the regulatory approvals are extremely strict even for your zebrafish.
So the last question by Priya Shivakumar is, how zebrafish are exactly useful for toxicological studies? Are they
Uh,
for the any drug approval? Are they used for toxicological studies?
okay, for drug approval, say for example, mostly they use cell culture system as well as rodent models. And there are some labs which actually use zebrafish. I have also used zebrafish adults, larvae as well as eggs for toxicology analysis, and they are very good. The main advantage is that you can use the eggs, larvae as well as adult for your toxicology, and it is easier to produce bioexposure of your toxic material to zebrafish as compared to your rodent models. So you can do any kind of toxicology work with zebrafish. All life stages can be used very extensively.
So, for want of time, we'll sort of wind up the session. So, anybody having any questions can please email Dr. Tyagarajan Raman. I'm sure he will respond to it positively. His email ID is given at the start of this presentation, Tyagi, THIAGI 2007 at gmail.com. So, please write to him. Sir will be able to answer your queries satisfactorily. And thank you, Dr. Tyagarajan Raman, for a
Thank
very
you, sir.
wonderful presentation. And
Thank you, sir.
we thank all the participants for a very cooperation, patient listening and cooperation, which helped in smooth conductance of this webinar. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you, sir. Thank you.